Well, concussion in contact sports has come into focus again recently ahead of a Senate inquiry into head trauma in sports. Law expert Dr. Windholz is calling for accountability from insurance companies who practice inequitable or inadequate policies with these types of injury. And he joins me live. Well, Dr. Eric, really appreciate your time here on Weekend Live. You actually appeared at the Senate inquiry during the week. What exactly is it investigating? And I guess what message did you try to get through?
Well, first of all, Simon, thanks very much for having me. The Senate inquiry is looking into the issue of concussion and head trauma in contact sport. It's looking at the issue incredibly broadly, everything from prevention to treatment to insurance and compensation, and it's looking at the issue across all levels of sport, from elite high-performance sport through to amateur, community, school, children's sport. The argument or the submission that I made to the committee was that current insurance arrangements are, in my view, inadequate and inequitable, and also in some cases may be operating in breach of workers' compensation laws. And I should say, in my submission, I wasn't slotting the blame to insurance companies. I think it's the whole scheme and the whole arrangement. And it primarily stems from the fact that professional athletes who are paid to play, are excluded from workers' compensation schemes. They're one of the very few professions that aren't entitled to workers' compensation scheme. So everything arises from the fact that they actually don't have the same protections that you and I have as employees.
Is that because there's an exemption based on professional sport?
Yeah, I mean, the exemption came in the 1970s. 1970s was a period when sport was first being professionalised. People were starting to earn some real money playing sport. But it was also at a time when sporting clubs found out, as a result of some litigation, that they actually had workers' compensation obligations but weren't fulfilling them. So rather than, in a sense, comply with the legislation as it was then, they were successful in lobbying governments across the country to get exemptions from the scheme.
And I think this issue has certainly come to prominence in the last couple of months, not only obviously in Australia with all sorts of head knocks in NRL, AFL, but the one recently in the United States involving the Buffalo Bills player, that probably has brought that conversation to the fore in that nation. Is there anything, I guess, that Australia is doing that that the US should be looking at, or even vice versa?
I mean, as with many things in sport, the United States is always a little bit ahead of Australia. And there was class action litigation in the United States by NFL players seeking compensation for concussion injuries. That litigation was settled and a significant compensation fund established. In Australia, there are a number of lawyers who are contemplating and potentially building a client portfolio to bring class action litigation, personal injury litigation in Australia. My submission, though, is if we have to resort to the courtroom to ensure that players are being adequately compensated for concussion injuries, then we've got a fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem is, if litigation is the answer, then it's evidence that the current insurance arrangements are inadequate.
What's the simple solution here?
Look, from my perspective, the starting point is to treat professional players like we treat any other Australian worker, and that is to include them in the workers' compensation schemes, in the state and territory workers' compensation schemes. Now, those schemes may not be fit for purpose for professional sports. They can be bureaucratic, they can be slow. Sports don't, and athletes don't need bureaucracy and slowness. And we might be able to build, and we should be able to build, a tailored scheme for professional athletes from that basis. But the starting point should be that professional athletes receive no less generous benefits than any other Australian worker.
And are you hoping that there'll be some outcomes out of this Senate inquiry that may head towards that way?
Oh, look, that is absolutely my hope. I mean, I think that I think the Senate inquiry is an excellent opportunity to have all the issues put on the table. I think rightfully the committee is looking at prevention, because we know that prevention is the best cure. But if you're talking about contact sports and you're talking about sports that are played with high intensity, high physicality, high velocity, then the idea that you can prevent all injuries is a nonsense. People will be injured, and because people are going to be injured, then how they are compensated, supported through the rehabilitation, and for those who get long-term chronic brain injuries, how they are supported post-career, then has to be an important part of the equation.
Very interesting. We'll have to keep an eye on that Senate inquiry. Dr. Eric Windholz, really appreciate your time here on Weekend Live. Thanks very much.